this morning. It's a couple minutes after. If anybody else shows up, they can just come in and join us. But it is good to see you all today. I know Judy and Floyd are up in Missouri trying to watch somebody play baseball, and I think they're getting rained out, but maybe it'll pass and they can play. But let's go ahead and get started today. We'll do our prayer request at the end. Do want to open with a word of prayer, and we'll be in 2 Corinthians chapter 12 if you want to start turning there. But we'll open with a word of prayer, and we'll get started from there. So, Morgan, would you care to open us in prayer this morning?
Dear Heavenly Father, we come to you this day, and we thank you for this opportunity, Lord, to be here in your house to study your word, that we might get knowledge and understanding and a little bit better wisdom to be better servants for you. Lord, we ask you to be with those today that need your hand upon their life, whether it be illness or loss or whatever might be going on with them, that your will be done in their life. And Lord, we just ask that you be with us as a church family, as a church home, to guide us and direct us, to be the servants that you'd have us to be. And Lord, we ask you to be with us in these times that are going on, to give us strength to bear the things that are happening all around us. Lord, we ask you to forgive us for it, in Jesus' name we pray.
Amen. All right, 2 Corinthians chapter 12, which some of you, if you were in Delbert's Sunday school class, or Eddie's, or Joey's, or then this past Sunday, you would have had a lesson over this as well. So it's interesting to me how God works timing of things out. We started on Sunday mornings, and Wednesday nights, we started the study of 1st and 2nd Corinthians almost a year ago now. And then our Sunday school lessons ends up on 2 Corinthians chapter 12 this past Sunday. We had preached on it the Sunday before that, and now we're looking at it on Wednesday night. So apparently there is something in there that God wants us to see. But I always find it interesting when things like that happen, because it was not planned at all. Obviously Sunday and Wednesday is, but the Sunday school lesson in there was not. So we'll see what God has in store for us with it today. So let's read it first, and we're going to go down through, we're not going to do the whole chapter. We're going to go down through somewhere around verse 10 is where we'll actually take our study from. We may read a little bit further in, but we're going to study down through verse 12. So let's start in verse 1. I must go on boasting, though there is nothing to be gained by it. I will go on to visions and revelations of the Lord. I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago was caught up to the third heaven, whether in the body or out of the body, I do not know. God knows. And I know that this man was caught up into paradise, whether in the body or out of the body, I do not know. God knows. And he heard things that cannot be told, which man may not utter. On behalf of this man I will boast, but on my own behalf I will not boast, except of my weaknesses. Though if I should wish to boast, I would not be a fool, for I would be speaking the truth, but I refrain from it, so that no one may think more of me than he sees in me or hears from me. So to keep me from becoming conceited, because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, a thorn was given to me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me, to keep me from becoming conceited. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong. I've been a fool, you forced me to it, for I ought to have been commended by you, for I was not at all inferior to these super apostles, even though I am nothing. The signs of a true apostle were performed among you with utmost patience, with signs and wonders and mighty works. For in what in what were you less favored than the rest of the churches, except that I myself did not burden you? Forgive me this wrong. Here for the third time I am ready to come to you, and I will not be a burden, for I seek not what is yours, but you. For children are not obligated to save up for their parents, but parents for their children. I will most gladly spend and be spent for your souls. If I love you more, am I to be loved less? But granting that I myself did not burden you, I was crafty, you say, and got the better of you by deceit. Did I take advantage of you through any of those whom I sent to you? I urged Titus to go and sent the brother with him. Did Titus take advantage of you? Did we not act in the same spirit? Did we not take the same steps? Have you been thinking all along that we have been defending ourselves to you? It is in the sight of God that we have been speaking in Christ, and all for your upbuilding, beloved. For I fear that perhaps when I come, I may find you not as I wish, and that you may find me not as you wish. That perhaps there may be quarreling, jealousy, anger, hostility, slander, gossip, conceit, and disorder. I fear that when I come again, my God may humble me before you, and I may have to mourn over many of those who sinned earlier and have not repented of the impurity, sexual immorality, and sensuality that they have practiced. And I'm going to stop there. And again, we're going to cover about through verse 10. He kind of takes a different turn, or he's going into his closing when you get to about verse 11. And he starts then talking about him coming to visit them again. And of course, he is still trying to convince them. This is kind of his last-ditch effort, and probably his best. He saved the best for last, I'll say it that way. But it's his last-ditch effort to try and convince them that they did not need to listen to Judaizers. He was not trying to take advantage of them, but he was trying to teach them the truth and do it with love, and that he had taken nothing from them. He had only given to them and given of himself, as well as the other individuals that had been. He makes mention of a few of those. Titus was one of them. So he takes a different route there after verse 11, and he begins saying, ultimately what he's saying is, really, you should have been valuing not only me, but the others that have come. And in the same way, Paul was communicating to them that he valued them. And he's saying that there's, it goes both ways. Like there's a value that we should have for those that teach us, but then there's also a value that as a teacher we should have for those that actually want to listen to us in some way. So Paul is saying, this goes both ways, but if you've not dealt with the sin issues, then you're probably not going to enjoy me coming back, because we're going to have to deal with them. And if you remember going back into 1 Corinthians, there was an issue in the church, and he instructed them to deal with that. And apparently they had with some of that, but it seems as though there may still be a little bit going on either in the church, or they have not totally removed it from the church. So however you interpret that. But apparently there was still something going on that was not good. And Paul was telling them they were going to have to deal with that. And if they didn't, then when he comes back and visits, then the visit will not be as enjoyable as if they deal with it. So let's look at our questions, and we'll kind of walk through these first 10 verses. I do believe this is a really important passage of text. It gives us a lot of insight into how God works in our lives through the life of Paul, and that it shows us that God blessings come in different ways, I'll say it that way. And sometimes blessings are not what makes us so tremendously joyful that we just shout from the mountaintops, but sometimes blessings come in ways that may keep us humble, and we don't realize the blessing of it until maybe later. And Paul's looking back here. Remember, he makes a statement, this was 14 years ago that this event that he talks about actually occurs. And by all the records that we have, Paul has never mentioned it until now. So 14 years has went by, and Paul has not mentioned this event, and now he brings it up.
14 years, that timeline, going back to what time?
It would have been back into the 40s, I believe. 40s, early 50s.
How long is he, how long after the road to Damascus?
It could have been within the first year or two of that.
Curious.
Could have been. Now, it may have been a few years after that as well. It could have been in the time, I didn't look at this, but it's possible that it could have been in the time when Christ actually ministered to him, when he went out into the wilderness. Could have been during that time, but it might have been after that as well. Timeline-wise, it may have been after that.
It's just interesting he mentioned 14 years in there.
Yeah. And that he's kept silent about it for 14 years, apparently. We don't have a record that he's told anyone else. So let's look at question 1. As the Judaizers were anxious to receive honors and boast about their letters of recommendation, if you remember going back to chapter 3, they actually did boast about that they had all these letters from different people that talked about how good they were and what they had done. Did Paul also fall victim to this, of being anxious to receive honors and boasting about letters of recommendation? And was Paul boasting about honor he had received from man or from somewhere else? So did he fall victim to the same thing as Judaizers did? No, he did not. Judaizers were actually looking at what man was saying about them, and they were using that to promote self. What was Paul? Paul was boasting, but what was he boasting about? And why was he doing it? Because it really wasn't what he wanted to do, from what we see.
He's boasting about what the Lord had done for him.
Yeah. It was more about what God had, the honor that God had given him. And if you read other things of Paul, like Paul realized that to just be the messenger of the gospel was a tremendous honor. And he talks about that in other writings, that he realized he had been given a great gift just to be able to go and to teach and preach and disciple, people. And so he considered that alone to be a great honor. But now he brings in this, this event that occurred in his life that's 14 years prior. And he says, this is a tremendous blessing that God's given me. Man has, no matter what kind of boasting man does, it can exceed what God has honored me with. And Paul wasn't wanting to do this, but this was the only way that these people would listen to him. It's the only way he could get them to understand that what the Judaizers were teaching was not good, and that they needed to listen to what he had to say, and others that he had sent, Titus, and as well as, I think Peter had spent some time there as well.
You think Paul brought up several different times, I'm Jewish, and I know as many of the laws as you do, and I know as much about it as you do, but that's not where this is coming from.
You got to imagine that those conversations happened at some point. Now, how he handled them, I don't know. If anyone had the right to boast about knowledge, it would have been Paul. He was trained under Gamaliel, so Jewish-wise, he knew the law inside and out. And then he has the Damascus Road experience where Christ actually speaks to him, and then he ministers to him after his conversion, and then we find out about this moment in time where he actually sees, whether it be the throne room of God or he actually sees where God resides anyway. And if anyone had the ability to boast and say, look, I know just as much as what you do, it would have been Paul. We don't really find that he gets into a lot of those debates. And I think he thought that they were foolish and somewhat of a waste of time. And so he focused on teaching the gospel. Because we can get sidetracked into a lot of things that take away our time that are really not valuable and really don't accomplish anything other than just maybe an argument with another individual. And I think Paul realized what was really important with that. But he could have, and maybe there were times where he did say that.
He was a great Judaizer, though.
Yeah.
I mean, he knew as much about the old law as any of them, but when he started teaching, Jesus Christ crucified, the Jews said, "Oh, this guy's gone off the deep end."
Yeah. Question 2, then, Paul refers to the third heaven. What is the first and second heaven if there's a third? Or is there a first and second heaven?
In the earth and in the atmosphere.
Close. So typically, what's referred to as first heaven would be where the birds fly, the sky that we see that is inhabitable by man or animal. Is typically referred to as first heaven. Second heaven would be what we hear sometimes, the Bible puts it as the cosmos, or all the planets, solar system that we see, or can see through a telescope, I guess, not microscope, telescope. That's typically the second heaven. And then third heaven would be what we have not and cannot see. And that's what Paul says he was taken up into. Now, he also refers to it in another way. Where's that at? Verse 3. He says, "And I know that this man was caught up into paradise." So he refers to it as paradise as well, depending on which translation you have. King James may put it in a different terminology. I'm not sure on that. I didn't look that up. But Paul was clear that what he had seen, whether he was physically there or whether he was just caught up in a spiritual sense and given a vision of it, whatever it was, Paul was clear that what he saw was actually the presence of where God resided. It wasn't a solar system. It wasn't the sky and where the birds fly. It was God's presence itself. So when you hear third heaven, and we have to be careful when we read throughout the Bible, sometimes that word heaven translated can mean any of those three places. So when you go back into Genesis and you see God created the heavens and the earth, if you'll notice, heavens is plural because he created the cosmos, and he also created the sky that's above earth that birds fly in. And at some point, heaven was created. We don't know exactly when, but or if it has been yet, because it may be. And I'm talking about the final heaven that we will all be in, and we don't know if it is or not. But we do know that there is a place where God resides now, and where Christ is sitting at his right hand. Some think of that to be the throne room of God, and that the throne room of God exists, but maybe the heaven where we will reside is maybe not there yet. But we'll know one day. All right, question 3 then. Paul mentions his experience to have been 14 years prior to this. What kept him from speaking of it before now?
He didn't feel the need to. The others were boasting, so he was trying to put them in their place, basically, but he didn't feel the need to.
Okay. Look over to verses, and you're kind of right there. But look at verses 6 and 7. He says, "Though if I should wish to boast, I would not be a fool, for I would be speaking the truth, but I refrain from it, so that no one may think more of me than he sees in me or hears from me." And then verse 7. "So to keep me from becoming conceited because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, a thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me, to keep me from becoming conceited." So what kept him from talking about it? Every time he wanted to, what do you think he was reminded of?
The thorn.
The thorn. Again, we don't know what that was. Whether it was, again, some people think that it was some kind of trouble with his vision, whether he couldn't see well, or it could have been cataracts. So, we don't know what it was. It could have also been some kind of physical, other than eyesight, some kind of physical. Most believe it was something physical. just because of the way he talks about thorn in flesh. And that word flesh translated seems to appear physical.
Like I mentioned last week, some even think it was a speech impediment.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Right.
But he mentioned something there about Satan buffeted him.
Yeah.
Now, it could have been like Job. He could have had the same thing that, you know.
The physical illness was probably not the same, but the situation was probably the same. God removed his hand of protection for whatever area of Paul's life that this thorn was in. And that's why I said I think these verses are really important for us to realize the way that God works sometimes. We see in Job that God just kind of backed away and said, okay, Satan, you can do anything but kill him. We see now in Paul, because, I mean, obviously, Paul brings up that it was Satan that actually applied the thorn in flesh. So apparently, God backed away enough to say, okay, Satan, you can do this, which then gives us a little bit of a broader understanding of how God works and what Satan does and what God permits, doesn't permit kind of thing. But the thorn is what kept him silent from speaking about it. And probably every time he thought about doing it, kind of going back to what Don mentioned earlier, like he could have said, guys, I know the Jewish law better than you, and I've been in the presence of God. Now, keep in mind, this experience he's talking about 14 years ago, there's another experience he had. He was actually in the presence of Christ. So if you remember, Christ appeared to him on the road to Damascus, struck him blind. So he had that experience as well that he could speak of. But we find that, Paul probably every time he wanted to have that conversation, he was reminded of this thorn, whatever it may have been. Maybe it was arthritis. And every time he thought about it, maybe his knuckles started hurting or something. I don't know, But
Think about the devil putting obstacles in their way. And Paul was being tested, and that thorn may have been a test the rest of his life.
Mm-hmm.
Because God had to test him, even though people meet Jesus Christ today and get saved. A lot of times, if you don't keep your eyes on the prize, you'll get back out in the world.
It's interesting, you think about this thorn in the flesh with Paul and what Don just mentioned. This is not a question on your list, so it's a freebie. But do you think God ever gives thorns in the flesh today?
Yeah.
Have you ever had something in your life that happened maybe years ago and you've never forgotten it? And you wish you would have done something different in that moment, and you've never forgotten that moment. That very well could be a thorn in the flesh to remind us, like Don just said, sometimes we forget things. But God may have those moments in our life in order to be a reminder for us of what we should not do, whatever it may be. I don't know. I think God, obviously, He can still work in that way because He's God, right? He done it once, He can do it again. Whether He does or not, or how He does that, I should say.
Why did he phrase it the way he did when he said, I know a man? He didn't say, I did it. He said, I know a man.
So again, Paul did not want to boast about himself, and so he writes it in third person, which was not tremendously uncommon for that day and time to write in third person on something like that. But in line with this trying not to boast about self, he writes it in this third person as well, which is interesting because some have looked and thought, well, maybe Paul's writing about someone else, but when you read on down, he connects himself to it.
It would be very difficult, like he says, to not be conceited when you could say to people, fellow believers, look, I'm in the know.
Yeah.
I know things you'll never know. Do what I say.
Yeah.
It would be knowing those things and having that relationship that most people will never experience, believers. it would be difficult to not become, I don't know if I wanna say arrogant, but kind of, I mean, like,
Yeah.
people.
Think about the burden too, because he knows
Yes.
this stuff is true. He's seen it. He knows what's going to happen if they don't, follow Christ.
It would be difficult to deliver it in a manner that it would be accepted
Right.
without being, kind of like your mother. What did I say?
Right. Right. If you go back into I think it's chapter 11, I believe, when he talks about that he was burdened, the greatest burden in his life is for the church. Verse 29, I think it is. No, verse 28 of chapter 11. He says, apart from other things, there is a daily pressure on me of my anxiety for all the churches. Thinking about, he's in the know, and he knows it's real. More firm than any of us know it's, and we know it's real, but he's seen it. And so the burden of getting people to understand what he's seen, and yet he's been told, you can't talk about this. That's got to be a burden too. Like, there's things I've seen, but I've been told I can't talk about it. I got this thorn in the flesh. If I talk about it, it's probably going to get worse. So, I got to not do this. It's interesting. He talks, he mentions the word, or uses the word revelations as well. You think ahead in the book of Revelation. John got to do the same thing. And we don't know if John was seeing into the future. We assume that he was in part of it, but we also know that he was seeing things, and there were things that Christ told him to write about. There were things that John wrote about that he just saw, and then there were things he was told he could not write about, which falls in line then again with what Paul is saying here, that I was told I can't speak of it. So you're right. What a tremendous, even that of itself, of making sure he doesn't talk about what he's not supposed to, and then not use it in an arrogant way, but present it in a way to where people would believe it. It had to be stressful to do that. All right, question 4 then. What instructions was Paul given when he was able to be blessed to see the third heaven? We already talked about this a little bit. What's the only instruction he was given? Yeah. Don't talk about these things. They're things that I've seen I can't talk about. And you got to think, when he makes that statement, like, someone is going to say, oh, come on, Paul, just tell me a little bit about it, Yeah. What was it you couldn't talk about,
Call them unspeakable, right?
Yeah. In question 5 then, does the Lord only supply us with blessings in our life? And do all sufferings come from God, or do any sufferings come from God? So let's answer the first one first. Does the Lord only supply us with blessings in our life?
No.
It might be a blessing in disguise.
I knew it.
Depends on how you interpret blessings, probably.
I think you could focus on the word supply in that. He doesn't supply it,
Okay.
he allows it.
Okay. Anything that even, if you want to go with allowed, anything that he allows in our life as a believer is actually for our own good, isn't it? Which then means that it would be a blessing, even though it doesn't look like a blessing. And I think that's where we have a hard time sometimes, is we look at what's going on in our life and we think, how is this a blessing? And that's when we are becoming very self-centered and self-focused, because when we start thinking about people around us, or the body of Christ, as we might say, then what we're going through may not be for us. It may very well be for someone else. And so from that standpoint, it is a blessing, maybe not just us, but when you think about the body. And we have to learn to think that way. And that's hard for us to think that way because we're always looking, we get up in the morning and who do we see in the mirror? We see self. We go to bed at night, we walk through the bathroom and we see ourselves in the mirror. I mean, self is what we see all the time. And we have to learn to look beyond that and think beyond that and think about body more than just self. So I think we could safely say that what God allows in our lives actually ends up being blessings. Maybe not in that moment in time, but ends up being that.
I think if you're a believer, God's in every part of your life.
Right.
I mean, I know sometimes it's difficult to understand things, but God's in every area of our life. For believers.
Right. Right.
Sometimes it gets hard to have to go through it for somebody else. You try and it just doesn't seem to be working. You're like, it gets hard going through it for somebody else. It's different if it's going through for yourself, but if you think you're going through it to help somebody else, then it's hard.
Sometimes I could see where in some people, because some people, personality-wise, we're just all different, right? I mean, God makes us with different personalities. Some people, it might be easier to go through it for someone else than it would be for themselves. If they are of the personality that is very giving and putting others, because there are people in this world that, like, they put everyone else in front of them. And then there's people that the other way, and I'm not meaning critical of either one. I'm just saying personality-wise, that happens. And so for some, it may be harder to go through it for someone else, but for some, it might be easier to go through it for someone else than it would be for self.
I've always thought about God knowing everything about people.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to look at that, God made you. Everybody has a capable to be saved. Everybody has a capability to sin. So God knows if you get on the right path, you're going to do the right thing. If you get on everybody in this room or anybody in this church has done something wrong in their life that they probably wouldn't like. And if that's a thorn in the side, so be it. Let it stay there. And just remind you.
Mm-hmm. And we'll probably continue to do something we don't like at some point because of our fallen nature.
Well, just get farther away from the world and closer to the Lord.
Yeah.
And then that stuff will be as frequent.
So the last half of question 5 then, do all sufferings come from God? Or do any sufferings come from God? So think back through the Bible. Let's think about different situations that we see. Use Job. Did Job's suffering come from God? I think what Natalie said is kind of important to remember.
It came from Satan, but God allowed it to happen.
Allowed it to happen. Okay, so we see in Job, and we see really here in Paul, right, that God allowed this to happen, but it was at the hand of Satan doing it. Are there any times we can think about where God actually did it?
Well, you go to the Old Testament, some of those people he had destroyed, some nations.
But they weren't believers of him.
Right.
Can you think of a moment or a time where God actually said, I'm doing this? What's that? I've had it, yeah.
Well, I don't know if it's, but he did open Adam and Eve's eyes. And
How about
they
the flood?
were perfect ones. He could have said, that's okay, kids, but he didn't.
All right. Right. You know, it's an interesting too, because sometimes what we go through in life is a consequence of our own decision. It's not, now there are some things that are really kind of unexplainable. Like, let's take arthritis in someone's life. Like, that we know of, we don't necessarily do anything that causes arthritis to happen, right? Now, if we go out and hit our finger with a hammer a bunch of times, maybe it sets up in there. I don't know. But like intentionally, we don't know if, we can't go out and say, you know, I really want arthritis in my life, so I'm going to do this so that I get arthritis, right? But now there are other things, overconsumption of alcohol, and what does that lead to? Typical liver problems, right? So, like, we know there are some things that we bring about our own consequence to. There are some things, and we have to suffer through those. They're not at the hand of God necessarily. Could God remove it? If he so choose, he could, but there are many times he lets us suffer through our consequences because that's how we learn, right? Or that's how someone else learns that's around us. But there are some things that are kind of unexplained, and we go through them. The flood is an interesting time. Someone brought up, Don may mention it, but the flood is an interesting time because that seems to be the hand of God actually doing it. We don't see any statement of, I'm going to back away and let Satan take over. Because, and here's another thought with that. Like, God had things happen to creation that had never happened before. Prior to that, rain had not fell on the earth. Well, is that something Satan can do? Satan's not a creator, right? He also had, water spewed from the ground as well, which is a change in creation. So it appears that there is a time maybe when God can do those things, but it also appears that when he's dealing with individual person, that it may be that God backs away and Satan then does what he does, which then should open our eyes to the protective hand of God that's on us all the time. Because if God was to back away, think about what Satan would do. Like, he would run rampant, right? And so we have to realize by the examples we see here that God has his protective hand on us all the time. And yet, do we really think about that? Like, do we wake up in the morning thinking, God, I'm so thankful you have your protective hand around me today. I could have died in my sleep, but you allowed me to wake up this morning. Like, I don't always wake up thinking about that. I should probably, but I don't.
Glad he keeps the oxygen turned on.
Yeah. But that's why I think this is really important. This story, and when you put it in context with Job's story as well, I think it's really important for us to see how God works in our life. Question 6 then. Why was Paul given a thorn in the flesh? Did God give this to him? We've kind of talked all around that. He was given the thorn in the flesh so he wouldn't be conceited, as he says in verse 7, to keep me from being conceited. Because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, a thorn was given to me. And then he makes a statement, a messenger of Satan. Did God give it to him? God allowed Satan to give it to him. But it doesn't appear that it was actually at the hand of God necessarily. And then question 7, what is significant about Paul praying 3 times for the thorn to be removed? So in verse 8, he talks about that. He says, 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. So 3 times. Why did he not pray 10? I mean, why 3? Do we find any other times in the Bible where something was prayed for 3 times, and after that, did not?
If you But notice on the next line though, he says, and he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you.
So he gave an answer.
So yeah, after 3 times he told him.
And we don't really know for sure if it was after the 3rd time. It could have been after the 1st. But Paul still pleaded. We don't know. The way it reads, it seems to maybe be the 3rd.
My translation says, each time he said no, but I am with you, and that is all you need. I don't know.
So it could have been. Go back to Jesus' time on earth. Was there ever a time where he prayed 3 times and after that he just accepted what was going to happen?
The Garden of Gethsemane.
Yeah. If you remember, he actually asked the apostles to pray with him, right? Especially the inner circle. He asked them to pray with him. And if you remember, he goes back, they're asleep. He wakes them up, all those times. And he prays to God, God, if there be any other way. But I know there's not, so let me take this cup. Paul here apparently prays 3 times. Whether he was given the answer each of the 3 or whether it came after the 3rd, I don't know if we know for sure on that. But in any regards, he did get that answer at some point. And, should we? And I'm throwing this out as a question. I don't know the answer to this. Should we, after 3 times of pleading with the Lord, should we back away and accept what's going on? Should we continue pleading with the Lord?
You should until you get an answer.
Who was it though that wrestled with the Lord?
Jacob, all night. And if you remember what happened to Jacob, you remember at the end what happened?
He lost.
Well, yeah, I guess you could say ultimately he did. And he put his hip out of place. Thorn in the flesh, so that he wouldn't forget. Which then goes back to, does God provide thorns today? Allow thorns today, I should say. All right, question 8 then. When suffering comes into our lives, how are we to deal with it? And then how is it dealt with? So first one is, how are we to deal with it? Second one is, how do we deal with it? Which can sometimes be different, right? So let's actually answer the second one first. So how do we deal with it sometimes? I would say that there's probably an individual that and I don't mean this critical, I'm just the only way I know to communicate it. There's probably an individual that moans, complains, gripes about it. Like just very verbal maybe about what's going on in their life. Doesn't accept it, but just complains about it. There's probably an individual that's very determined that they're going to make it through it in their own, like their own physical strength. So you don't necessarily hear them moping, complaining, griping about it. You just see a determination, but it's a determination from a physical standpoint of, I'm going to get through this kind of thing. And then there's probably a middle of the road of that as well, I would guess.
Which is worse, physical suffering or mental suffering?
Personally, I would say mental, but I don't. I mean,
so too.
that may be different in a lot of people's case, but I would say mental.
Don't you think how we deal with it is really based on how long you have to deal with it? Like if the same thing, you try and it's not working, you try and finally it's just like, why?
Longevity of it could play in, especially, and this is why I wanted to answer the second part first, because I want to get to the first part. The first part would imply, how's the best way for us to deal with it? Yeah. Going to the Lord with it and maybe trying to figure out why it's there. which would then, and this is why I went there, which would then come back to maybe it's there for a long period of time for a reason. And if so, then if we're not acting in our own ability, our own physical ability, but we're acting with an understanding of why God is doing this, then the longevity we may be able to endure in His strength, all done in His strength. Whereas if we were trying it on our own, we wouldn't be able to. So I think having the right mindset about what's going on determines much about how we deal with it, and determines much about how long we can deal with it. So I think we have to go to the Lord in prayer. We see this example from Paul. He gets the thorn in the flesh, and what does he do? He prays not only once, he prays 3 times about it. Whether he got the answer the first time, he still prayed about it. And if he got it the second time, he still prayed about it, And maybe he was pleading that it would go away, even though God was telling him that His grace was sufficient. And then he determined after the 3rd time that, God is sufficient in all areas, including this. And so I should accept what it is. And maybe the longevity sometimes, I'm not saying in every case, I'm just saying sometimes, maybe the longevity is to get our mindset right about it. That it's there for that length of time because we have to realize that God is working in His time, in His way, and it's to accomplish something that we can't see right now. Like Paul doesn't really know. He knows that he was given this thorn to keep him from being conceited. But what effect did that have on other people? Like we're sitting here talking about it today, right? So obviously it had effect on more than just Paul. So there is a way that people deal with things that is an earthly way. And then there's a way that we deal with them when we acknowledge that God does have sovereign control over us. And for some reason, He has allowed this to happen. And when we put it in that mindset, that framework that He's allowed this to happen for some reason, then it changes how we deal with it. But it's hard to get there sometimes, right? Like in the moment of emotions, it's hard to get there.
A while ago, you spoke of arthritis.
Yeah.
Okay, you're supposed to talk to the candidate right.
And I didn't mean anything about that.
But the doctor said, I have it bad. Okay, I have a problem. My hands will try to tighten up, lock it, the fingers lock up. And take meloxicam every day for arthritis. Every so often I have to get a shot in the shoulder because it gets to the point I can't stand to lift my arm. I prayed to God before about it. But I pray, God, if you ain't not going to heal me from it, if it's not your will to heal it, then just give me the strength and the understanding to live with it, to go on.
Right.
That your will be done. That's all I know.
And that's all we can do in those times. And I will say, I'm glad you come back to that because that's a good point. Because I said earlier that some things happen to us, there's really no explanation for it. Like why arthritis? We don't know. What we do know though is that there are times that we suffer consequences for previous generations' actions. So you go all the way back to the Garden of Eden and the fall of man. These things didn't happen before the fall of man. So as a result of a decision that was made by our, however far back that would be, we now suffer the consequences of physical ailments that did not happen prior to, the fall of man. So I guess we can look at that even and we can say, well, it is a result, not necessarily of our action, but of an action that happened before us, because it wasn't the way God designed us to be. But due to the fall of man, we now suffer all of those things.
Also, it's easier you to serve him using your strengths, but if he wants you to serve him in your weak area, you think, that's not my strong point. And
Yeah.
it makes you rely more on him. If you're serving him in a weak area, you're not as likely to say, I got this.
You're exactly right.
And to elaborate with that, I think that if you're struggling maybe with your faith and you hit rock bottom, it leads you to, hopefully, to look up and seek the Lord in that as well. So it is at your weakest moment that you can become the strongest.
Yeah, that's a great conversation because a lot of times we think that God wants us to serve us, like he gives us the abilities to do certain things, right? And so we're always kind of looking around the church and see like who has the ability, and we think about using because God's blessed them with that ability, right? But what if God is wanting someone that doesn't personality-wise necessarily have that ability, but going back to what was said, he wants to show his majesty through that, his, whatever you term that, his strength through our weakness again. Some of y'all I think have heard me talk about it, but by personality, I'm actually an introvert. I know Sunday morning sermon length, you may not think that, but I actually am. It's hard for me, and I don't do it in my own. I can't do it in my own because, but through God, I've been able to do that because that was one of the big things when I first entered ministry was you got to stand in front of people and talk. It's not what I do, but it is through God, and God has brought me a long way through that time, and actually I can see prior to surrendering how He was bringing me even through that time. Looking backwards, I can see that. I didn't see it at the time. Okay, question 9, I think we are. Is God obligated to heal every believer when they pray? And what does He encourage us to do?
If God heals, every time we pray, ask Him to heal, He heals. Well, we might live to be older than Methuselah did. It's appointed unto man wants to die.
Yeah.
I'll get personal again, but Maxine was in the hospital. So I prayed to God to heal her. Okay, she passed away. Now, should I felt anger at God because she died? No, He has helped me to understand, we believe in God, believe in Jesus. We take Him as our Lord and our Savior, and we live a Christian life, so we can end up where she is.
Yeah.
She made it home.
Right. She's not dealing with arthritis or anything else.
Or
Yeah.
with me either.
He did. That's a great point. He did heal her. It was in a different way than what maybe we're praying for.
Don't you think if He answered or healed every believer that asked, that we would think it was easy? We would stop praying after the first time. If he give us what we wanted every time we prayed, we would stop praying for the thorn in our side or whatever, but the way it is, you keep coming back to Him and keep praying and keep praying. Christian life was not supposed to be easy, and if He give us everything we wanted, it would be easy. Therefore, we probably wouldn't be as diligent to pray and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to
If
Job,
you're truly a believer, how can you be sad when a believer dies and goes to heaven? That's our ultimate goal,
Right.
is heaven, to be in the presence of God.
Now that's hard. The immediate moment when it occurs. because again, sometimes we go to self instead of thinking about the believer.
It is difficult to rejoice in death.
Yeah,
When, if a believer dies,
right. Given time, and for some people it's a short, for some people it may be longer, whatever it may be. Given time, we, as a believer, we do come to that point.
I think our grief is for us personally, not them.
That's true.
Yeah,
It's
Yeah.
our grief that we miss them and everything, but it's not that we grieve the fact that, the good Lord took them home. It's that, it's our personal loss that we grieve.
and sometimes we grieve for their family as well, like the family's loss, like we think, and
Personal loss.
yes, yeah,
Sometimes you grieve if that person never showed any sign of coming to the Lord.
yeah, it's total different conversation if it's not a believer,
Right.
total different conversation.
And then you see a lot of difference between when a believer passes and when a family that has a non-believer. Also, you see that different emotion.
Yeah. Even though there's a sadness, there is a peacefulness at a believer passing. When it's not a believer, even though there's sadness for what there's not peace when it's an unbeliever. So there's a sadness and unpeacefulness about it as well. So I don't know if we ever really answer, is God obligated to heal every believer when they pray? He is not obligated to heal every believer. He never says that he will heal every believer.
handed it all to us.
No. Except through his love. And his love does, if you interpret it that way, his love does obligate us, or obligate, but it's only through that. I don't know if any of you ever seen, there was a movie, it's not that great of a movie even, but I've seen it. It's, is it Evan Almighty? Bruce Almighty? One of the Almighty movies. Anyway, there's this guy that God appears to, and he allows him to become, and this is where the movie gets off, but he allows him to become ruler or God over, I think it's 2 blocks in New York City or something like that. So he can do whatever in that. But he has to act as if he's God. So all prayers that happen come to him from that 2-block area. Have you ever seen this movie? Okay. So he starts hearing all these voices in his head. And it's all these prayers that are coming. And he doesn't know what to do with them because like they're all talking all over the top of each other. Because if you think about a block or 2 in New York City, you're talking about thousands of people. So he says, all right, all prayer requests are to go in Post-it notes. Well, he's in his apartment. So his whole apartment is covered in Post-it notes all over the place. And he says, that's not going to work. He says, all prayer requests go to email. So his email starts, like this is back in the day when they used to ding when you got one. It's just like a massive ding all the way through, And so finally he makes a statement. He says, let's just answer all prayer requests with yes. Yeah. And I will give this to, and I'm not saying it's a great movie, but I will give this to whoever done the movie. They'd probably done a pretty good job of showing why that should not happen. And he actually walks out in the street because all of the prayer requests then disappear. He doesn't have all the email, he doesn't have the Post-it notes anywhere, all that are gone. And he walks out in the street, but there is like carnage going on. And we don't think about that when God answers, he's answering for the good of all of creation. Not just, again, self, but he's answering for the good of all creation. And so there are some times that the answer is no because it prevents something that we can't even see from happening that would be very detrimental to creation or to people. So he doesn't obligate himself to heal. What does he encourage us to do, though? He does encourage us to bring all of our requests or petitions to him. Now, I think there's a reason for that, and that is so that he can mature us in our life to understand why the answer comes back as it does. Because he answers all, and that's something I didn't put in there. He's not obligated to heal every believer. He does answer every believer, though. And so I think he wants us to come to him with him so that he can work in our lives to show us at some point why the answer is what it is, whatever it may be. So I think that is another way that he works within us. Look at question 10 then. Does God heal by substitution or by transformation? Does he substitute sickness for health, or does he give us grace so that the affliction works for us and not against us? So in Paul's situation, let's think about that for a minute. If he healed by substitution, which is what Paul was actually praying for, he had been given a thorn in the flesh, whatever it may be, he's asking for that to be substituted with health. So take one away, put something else there. Health instead of thorn. God actually answered Paul's request, but he said, my grace is sufficient for you, which meant then it was by transformation, which means that God's grace worked in Paul's life to where the affliction he had actually worked for him because it actually prevented him from sinning. If he would have become conceited, is that not a sin? Tremendous, right? So his affliction worked for him and allowed him not to, at least in that area, helped him not to sin in that way. So he answered the request by transformation. My grace is sufficient. This will help you in the long run. I'm not substituting health for the illness or the affliction you have. I'm going to use this to transform your life. I think that is the hardest for us to grasp because we can't see the transformation down the road. Remember, Paul is 14 years past asking for this. He's looking backwards now and he's seeing what God has done. And he realizes, I would have been conceited, but I'm not because God gave me this thorn. That's why he done it. It's easier for us to look backward, right? It's harder for us to see it happen now and realize this is what God's doing. Question 11 then, how did Paul glorify God through the way he dealt with the thorn? He's actually doing it right here, isn't he? That he's talking about that God gave the thorn as, I don't know if he uses the word blessing, but we could call it that. He gave him the thorn as a blessing that prevented him from sinning. And so he's giving God glory through that. So he talks about it in that way. All right, practical lessons. Question 12 then. The spiritual is far more important than the what? The physical. Much more important than physical. But what do we typically think in? Physical, right? But the spiritual is far more important than that because we have eternity to think about. Just like we sit here and we talked about the funeral of an unsaved, like there's no peace in that. But yet, you go to the funeral of a saved and there is peace, even though there's sadness. All right, letter B then, if we trust God, then we know he can balance our what? Could say lives. He balances our afflictions, and I'm going to use the word blessings here in the way we typically think about blessings. He balances our afflictions with our blessings, and it all works together for a blessing in our life. Does that make sense? That there is a balance of both of those things. All right, letter C. Not all sickness is caused by what? Yeah, not all sickness is caused by sin. However, some sickness is caused by sin, right? Some sickness may actually be to prevent sin, which is what Paul was dealing with here. And then letter D, blank is worse than sickness. Sinfulness, yeah. Sin is worse than sickness. It's actually the worst. Physical sickness or illness should not prevent us then from what? So physical sickness or illness should not prevent us from what? Okay, being saved, following God, that's kind of where I wanted to hit on, is actually our service in the body of Christ.
Paul didn't let it stop him from going ahead and serving God,
That's right.
and it shouldn't stop us.
That's right. Yeah, no matter what we have, there's a way, some way. It's not all going to look the same, but there's some way that we can serve Christ, no matter what our affliction or illness may be. I think I've told the story before of a lady very influential in my life that she had bone marrow cancer. And the last time I saw her, she was laying in bed. Every time she moved, it would actually break a bone in her body. But she was still praising God through that time. And that was a case where she had a terrible physical illness, but yet anyone that came and saw her was uplifted by her talking about the goodness of God in her life. She did not have her mind on the physical. She had her mind on the spiritual. So there's always something that we can do, and we just have to have ourselves in that mindset. All right, any last thoughts or questions? All right, we're going to close out then our question time, and we'll go into prayer requests then, and then we'll have prayer at the end. I would ask you to remember a couple of different things